to learning sessions at STC. Our first on documentation metrics, the why, what, and how. This is being presented by Sangeeta D. Kataria. Sangeeta D. Kataria has 15 years of experience in software product industry, a certified usability analyst from HFI and an IBM enterprise design thinking practitioner. She's passionate about creating user-centric deliverables. Please welcome Sangeeta D. Kataria.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Megha. And good morning, everyone. Okay, yes, okay. So, so before we actually begin on matrix, I'd like to understand from the audience who of you all already use matrix in your organization, specifically for documentation. Okay, all right. And I think everybody has a fair amount of idea what matrix are. Anyone who doesn't understand what matrix mean, it's okay. We can, get into the basics as well. Okay. And those who raise the hands, what methods do you all currently use? Yeah, like if anybody, yeah, like what methods do you currently use? Okay. Okay. No. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Please. Yeah. And can Amiga, can you have the mic or the hand mic?
So we do a lot of measurement of the consumption of the data that we provide to the customers.
Right. And what do you use any specific tool or
Yeah, we
any
use
method?
tools,
Like.
web analytics tools.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. All right. Okay, so as we all understand, metrics are basically measures of quality. So, if you want to project any value or any, you want to project numbers to someone, that this is the, as we just saw even in the salary survey just now, that numbers give you, give the audience or your stakeholders a perspective that yes, this is bringing results. So it's basically quantitative, but it can also be qualitative. Like a couple of us, we always take surveys. We take those satisfaction surveys wherein they have those comments block where they specifically ask how you want to improve. So matrix can be both qualitative as well as quantitative. And they enable you to make data driven decisions. So yeah, as we just yeah just we as we just as I just mentioned, they help you to to prove basically using data. They remove the they remove the bias out, they remove the assumptions out, they remove everybody's opinion out. So when you are in a meeting of stakeholders, you if you use data to present something, there are chances of people looking at it more objectively than subjectively. The convincing factor is more. And how matrix basically work is that you start by collecting data. So once you start putting in a process in your organization to do with the matrix, where you first will collect lot of data. It will not happen in day one, not even in one quarter. It will be like you have to keep tracking the data, keep accumulating the data, and you keep analyzing. So it's an evolving process. You improve over time. So that's how that's how the diagram says that data tracking leads to the analysis part. So, so just keep collecting data, keep tracking your matrix, you keep improvising. You begin the journey, identify like, 3-4 matrix, and you begin the journey, and you keep improvising over a time. So data will help you. So the best part about matrix is that data helps you become better. So that's like, that's a good part about matrix. So this was in general about matrix. Now, we look at specifically about documentation matrix. Uh, Sorry, before that, that's the agenda. So I plan to cover the whys, the what. Like by whys, I mean why do we need documentation matrix, and by what is like what kind of matrix you should track. And then we come to the interesting part, which even I like, is that there are a couple of popular frameworks which are used in the product management space, which are used to track the success of a product. And so I've just studied these two frameworks, and it's my basic analogy that how we can use one of the frameworks for our documentation matrix, what are the benefits, and then we look at a few methods and a few tools like the common surveys, Google Analytics, and lastly we look at the advanced usability testing methods. So most of these, I mean, all these methods have not been implemented as yet. We're just like, I'm trying to evolve around it. So a few things, if you all have any more inputs to add on, please do, please do, like you're more than welcome to add on. Okay. So do we need documentation matrix? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So Kavya, please tell us, why do you think we need?
I think that's the most important thing, A, to measure, show value of the work that we do, ask for resources. For anything you need metrics to back you up. So I think it's very, very important.
Right. Anybody else wants to like add on to this? Okay, yes. So as rightly said, matrix is something which you can project with numbers. As I mentioned earlier, it removes the bias out, it removes the suggestions, the opinions and assumptions. You get more focused, you get more, data driven. All right. So now the common whys about specifically for documentation matrix is that most of the time, we create a lot of information. Your team's working very hard. They're creating a lot of topics over a period of time. But you really want to understand that, is it really getting the value? Is it getting the product adoption? We are all focused, driven by the product teams to, to make the product a success. We may have maximum users adopt it, increase the retention, decrease the dropouts. So documentation is a very powerful tool to enable that. So that's like the first why, that is your documentation really effective to achieve that product success? And then the second thing is, which we are mostly aware of and which is mostly highlighted most of the time, is are there many complaints around your documentation? Like, are there too many customer support calls? Is like, your customer support team is always in a meeting, especially of management meeting, it's always flashed, that, oh, there are so many calls around specific documentation and your documentation sucks. We've got this comment, once, that the documentation sucks. So you feel like, oh my God, really? Are we so bad? Okay, another thing is resources, Oma. So resources argument, I'm sure everybody has in all organizations, be it small or big, is like there's a big product, there are 10 developers, 10 QE teams, but there's only one documentation engineer who's doing it. So you are always like, you and your manager are always having this discussion that how do you project the need for resources, that is it really needed? So here, that's where the matrix come in, so that if you over a period of time, you can project that you are not able to, especially in an agile cycle, you're not able to deliver along with your product. Your documentation is always coming behind. So that's where, that number, will help you project to your management that yes, we do need one resource at least added to this particular product, especially if it's very important to the company's business success. And fourthly is that for your status reports, everybody wants, especially like the C folks, executives don't have the time to read your big mails, read your big reports. So numbers and graphs do the best. And the last three things are interesting because many a times we are now moving into changing our content strategy. We either modify the information architecture. We either move to, if you're in an offline format, you move to an online format, or you've recently migrated to a new tool. So you have basically asked for money from your organization to do this, either time or money, and that needs to be justified, because someday if in spite of changing your content strategy, changing your moving to a new format, you are not able to help the product adopt, then it's going to become a big why was I asked to spend so much. So that's where you can say, I mean, the matrix will help you come to a conclusion that no, the documentation is doing a good job. It's maybe something to do with the product or the market which is not not really picking up. So these are the few common whys for the matrix. Any otherwise who, I mean, if anyone wants to suggest? Okay, all right. Yeah, so just, so bringing the definition back to specifically for documentation. So documentation metrics are basically measures of quality and value specifically for documents. Like it could be any document. Here we're not talking only of software industry. We're talking of both software, hardware, marketing. It could be business proposals. Everything and anything under the type of documentation whose value you feel is important in your organization to project can be depicted using matrix. So just to summarize it, the matrix enable you to connect your business goals to your measurable outcomes. They help you validate your user research and hypothesis. So nowadays there's a lot of insistence on user research, even from the communication industry, like, as technical communicators, we are pulled in at the product design phase to understand the personas, so that, at that stage itself, how technical the product, if it's a security product, is it going to have an administrator and a user? So you are understanding the personas. So matrix is, although it comes, at the end after delivery, it helps you validate whether, that effort that you spent on the research was justified. And as I've been saying, that it helps you project value to your product stakeholders. It identifies, it helps you the most important aspect is it helps you connect to your users. It helps you get those feedback, be it very dirty feedback, but it's very important to know what your users think of your documentation. Because we're really working hard, we are many a times, even like from the basic configuration information, if it's not helping my deployment engineer who's sitting in the US and reading that stuff and he can't deploy it, then all my effort is not worth it. So somewhere down the line, this becomes a medium to understand, even that one feedback that, yes, this is not helping, please add this, please, do this. So that I think is the main, main need for matrix. And all this, matrix eventually, once you know which areas are not coming, which are not up to the mark, you will automatically, think about improvising your architecture, your content strategy. All right. So now let's come to the matrix part. Like what matrix should we track? So the common documentation matrix that I have identified, the customer support calls, which are very, they are very common. We've all heard, I am sure, like in one day's time, we've heard about it in various sessions as well. So customer support calls are genuinely important, So I've had this opportunity to be a part of a customer support discussion, So there was this one product for which the documentation was not giving the value. So then they were having, and the product, they were not the customer was just angry, So we had this customer support call, like the customer support team arranged a call, they called in the development team and they said, you also join in, let's see, because you'll understand your problems best. So that's where you realize that the customer is not looking at the right version of the documentation. They are looking at a legacy documentation. So you like, okay, so it's not something to do with my effort. It is something which has not been, there's a misunderstanding in referring to the right version. So the customer support team and the calls which they receive specifically for documentation is one of the, metric which is very important. Then the helpfulness ratings, which most of us provide in our knowledge base online, help centers, and the negative comments. Here I haven't written the positive comments, which should also be tracked actually, but many a times it's the negative feedback which is, the most important to take care of and understand. So the negative comments received. Here I've mentioned specifically for each product documentation. If your company has like a huge suite of products, you do that, for each products, and eventually you keep improvising that process and, find a way of clubbing the related products together and tracking the matrix for that group. And the frequently searched items, the page visits inside your online knowledge base, the number of dropouts. So these are the very general, the common metrics which are on any website that, So the frequently searched terms is important is basically because many a times, in spite of you spending a lot of effort on the information architecture, the one thing which every user of your product will do is search. They will just search and look at the information. Everyone will not have the time to go through your TOC or go through your product, hierarchy which you've given on the front page. So search terms, I feel, is the most important, like it's an important metric to track. Okay, so now coming to the product management frameworks. So as we all know, especially in the B2C products, which is the consumer products like Flipkart, your Uber, your Swiggy, your Zomato, those are all consumer products. Those are like, products which we use on a day-to-day basis. So these matrix, the product management matrix, which I'm going to be talking about, I have been in the, in the industry for a couple of years now. They basically, help you understand your user behavior. There is a lot of focus using design thinking and user research on user, but it's the matrix which will actually tell, actually help you read the user's mind. They will help you understand the behavior. So the product space has, they've actually worked very hard to bring up frameworks which help you categorize, group up quality metrics, and prioritize. So, if I have like a group of five groups, this quarter, I will have a discussion with my product team that what is most important. Is adoption more important? Retention more important? You tell me, and then we focus on that particular group. So that is the main motivation of these frameworks. They help you categorize matrix into groups, and you can decide in discussion with your team which is the category that you should focus on. Yeah. So that's the AA framework, the Pirate matrix. This has been designed by Dave McClure. Dave McClure is a venture capitalist in the Silicon Valley and very famous in the, the product management space. And this framework, the Pirate metric framework, is very famous in the market, especially for B2C products, even B2B. But B2B is basically, these are the big enterprise products like your Microsoft, like the big, you can say the ones which you don't directly interact with your customers. But the B2C products are the consumer products, small ones like the apps. There, the Pirate framework is used very often. So it consists of 5 categories as the acronym suggests. A stands for acquisition, another A stands for activation, the R stand for retention, revenue, and referral. So they're quite self-explanatory, but I'll quickly go through. So by acquisition, you mean the number of customers you are acquiring, So there are a lot of channels. And in our case, I will always relate things to our documentation because at the end of the day, it's a mapping. So in our case, acquisition would be the channels by which your users are coming to your documentation. Is it through search results or is it through any paid channel? Marketing uses a lot of channels, if you all know, in our organization to promote the products. They try to understand whether, which is the channel which is most working. So if you worked in a startup, if it's a new launch, then they actually connect with third-party, websites like Facebook. You many a times see those Biba ads in Facebook. So that's a technique, that's a marketing technique wherein we are clubbing with another vendor, and we're that's a channel by which you will acquire customers. And once you acquire those customers, they will get into a habit of, using your deliverable or your item, and then there will no longer be a need to have that kind of a third-party association. So that's what I mean by acquisition. The same applies for documentation. Many a times, a couple of customers come from Google to our knowledge base. Then let's talk about activation. So activation in the product space, if for a cloud product would be subscriptions. So how many people have actually subscribed? But in case of our documentation, what you mean by activation is somebody who's actually done something inside your knowledge base, actually gone into a product category, read one article, clicked on a page at least. So that is like, okay, so that person has started at least using the deliverable. Whatever work we've done, they've at least started, they've not just looked at the page and gone away. So that's what in the documentation terms. Retention is, as the word says, is that How many people keep coming back to your knowledge base? How many people keep coming back? How many people keep downloading the PDFs from your knowledge base? And you also identify the churn rate here. So churn rate is basically the dropout rate. So this is also, you know, a negative metric, but it helps you understand that how many people are coming and they're just leaving the knowledge base. They're not even getting inside. And lastly, it's the revenue, which is not applicable for our documentation purpose, but revenue in the product space is somebody who's taken a subscription, who's on Amazon, has bought something. So one successful transaction has got some money to me. That's the revenue metric. And referral. So this metric, I think, is very important for documentation purpose also, because if so in my current organization, we have, you know, we telecom operators are our clients, and they are very closely connected. So if somebody is happy with my one particular product, what we've observed is that the business comes without our actually approaching someone, the business comes from another telecom operator automatically. So the same can be applied, you know, the net promoter score, the NPS, which is mentioned there, it helps you attract more. So if your documentation portal is doing fine and has helped someone to achieve a task, there are chances that that person will refer it in some call. At least your customer support will refer it to another customer, and that's how your other customer will get onboarded to your site. So that's the triple R. Now let's look at another framework, which is the Google's Heart framework. So this, I feel, is more applicable to our documentation. It is less revenue driven. It's less focus on the business, but more on the value. So as Heart suggests, H stands for happiness, E stands for engagement, A stands for adoption, retention, and task success. So happiness is basically you're measuring the user's attitudes, whether they have satisfied with your deliverable, they are happy, they've been able to achieve the task. Task success is another thing which helps you, you know, whether your search results have been good. The happiness and the task success, that's the first, the last category, they're quite interconnected. And in between we have again the engagement, that is the number of visits on your, you know, on your portal, the number of common tasks that people have performed, whether they've engaged with your deliverable. Be it an online, yesterday we had a session on tutorials, like the SAP Labs team conducted one. So that's another way, you know, if there's something new which you've introduced to the customers and you want to really track if they're getting engaged, they're getting adopted to it. So the engagement metrics and the adoption metrics is very important. It helps you understand that. And retention, as the name says, it's basically the rate at which your existing customers are you know, how many people are sticking around, how many people are just coming back. And applying this framework to the documentation space, here are a few metrics which I've identified basically for the Heart framework. Is under happiness, you would say it's very obvious, it's the net promoter score, the negative positive ratings, satisfaction, the very obvious ones, the helpfulness ratings, the ease, or you know, how happy. It's basically happiness means how happy as an end user I am with whatever you give me, be it a marketing collateral, be it a business proposal, whatever you give me, if that document is making my life easy, is helping me achieve my business goal, I will give you a good happiness rating. And the engagement, say, I mean, as it's very parallel to, you know, what we just discussed earlier, it's a number of visits, number of completed tasks, average session duration, the number of customer support calls, specifically for documentation. So these customer support calls are very, you know, you can either track them depending on at what stage your product is. If it's a new product, then you may be tracking that in a weekly format. But if it's a new product, it's a mature product, you're keeping adding the, you know, adding features, then you maybe track it over a month or maybe a quarter. Adoption is, you know, as we just discussed, the number of users, number of downloads, number of subscriptions in a SaaS product. Retention is, you know, similar, number of active users in your portal, how many people are dropping out, how many people haven't done anything in the last 1 week or 1 month. So how sensitive, you know, how you want to, the timely duration, how you want to track is up to, you know, your organization's, how important that particular product is. So yes, yeah. So these are that covers the what part, like, you know, what kind of matrix which we can cover and the Heart framework applied to it. So what, as I was suggesting that, you know, So suppose, I want to concentrate. So these frameworks help you basically group and prioritize. So suppose my first, intention is to engage or to adopt, because my product is new, my documentation is new. I'm sure that I'm not going to get happiness and task success so early. So my first focus would be to have adoption and engagement. So that's where these frameworks come in, they keep you focused. They tell you that these are the metrics that I should concentrate on at least for the next 2 quarters. And then once I have success in this, I will go to the next category. So this is the basic advantage of having these frameworks here.
So in which of these categories are you tracking the space where you spoke about customer queries coming in and how quickly you're able to resolve SLAs? Are you tracking any of them in?
Yeah, so in the happiness matrix, we track the number of customer support calls. So it's basically
And your SLA for it?
SLA, yes. So it's in that category you track. So that's also, it all depends on how mature your product, at what stage your product is and your documentation is. Okay, so last part is the how do we track matrix. So here we look at some common methods and then we look at some advanced methods as I said earlier. Right. So first thing, if you are like new to the matrix cycle, the first thing is you have to understand the type of business you are like. So if you are in the B2C space, you have to track matrix, even the product matrix get tested early on. So it's very important to start early, even for your documentation. So understanding the type of business is very important. Then the tools that your product teams already use. So now if in my organization, Google Analytics is already used, then that makes a very logical decision that I can use the same tool for the documentation also. So it's very important when you propose something that you first do your research and talk to your product teams, talk to your engineering teams that are we using any tools, just identify that. And lastly is the delivery method, which is that whether it's still in the online format or whether it's in the offline format. So here's the common tools and the usability testing. We'll have a look at each of them going ahead. You will be getting these slides, so all this will be available to you. So let's begin with surveys. So anybody wants to tell me what are surveys? I'm sure all of us have taken a survey once in a lifetime, right? Yes, so anyone?
To get the people's opinion to find out meaningful output.
Right.
So that's how we get the opinion of the different sort of people from the different communities.
True, correct, yes.
Final output of it. It depends on the objective of the task that we are looking for.
Okay.
Information that we are looking for.
Correct. Anybody else?
Usability experience.
Is a way of gauging the usability experience? Yes, that's correct. But I'm just looking at a little more basic definition. So surveys are basically a set of questions and they have structured answers. So you have, if you observed in all surveys, they give you these options. You have only maybe one question which is a subjective, but most of the other times the answers are given. And maximum thing that you can derive from a survey is quantitative data. That is the main reason why we use surveys, to get those numbers, We basically measure the data on a Likert scale of 1 to 5. So you want to understand how many people have given me 5 and how many people have given me 1, So that's like the main focus for surveys. And surveys are very easy to use, as we know. We use them, we can create them in Google Forms and SurveyMonkey. There are a lot of open source tools available. So the two types of surveys that we can use for documentation are the customer satisfaction survey, very, as the name suggests, to understand if your end users are happy with your customers, and the net promoter score. It helps you understand how likely your users are to recommend your document to other products. So surveys are very straightforward. If anybody has any queries specifically to how to design a survey and how to roll it out, we can connect offline and I can answer all questions around it. We use a lot of surveys even for our STC India events at the end of the salary survey which we just did. So at the end of every STC session, we we roll out these surveys that how was your experience, so that we can improvise on that experience. We can make this next session better. Okay. So Google Analytics, yes. So how many people here already are aware what is Google Analytics? Okay. Okay. Okay, so quite a few people know. And all of you all already use Google Analytics? Do you all use for documentation? Okay, great. So that makes me happy, yes. So because Google Analytics is it's an exciting tool. It's very good, you know, like it gives you everything you need. You just need to like learn how to use it. And it's very easy to use and even to, you know, configure it from your web page. In my references section, there is one particular video which you should watch, which will get you started on Google Analytics. You don't need to learn anything more, just go through that video and you are good to begin with Google Analytics. So in this particular section, you know, we focus more on the audience part. So if you look at the audience section, I have highlighted that. So this is the important section to understand if you have an online knowledge base and you want to understand how many users have come to you in a day, in a month, in a year. There are tabs at the top which are not shown here, but they are at the top where you can select the time and you can check that these are my numbers, this is my bounce rate. By bounce rate I mean people come, don't do anything, they just go out. Or they are just, you know, there is average session duration. So people come, they have spent 15 minutes, but they've not achieved anything, you know. If I ask that particular user, what is your, like, you know, your happiness ratio, they give a negative feedback. So then you try to understand that, you know, from this particular area, I am getting a lot of hits, a lot of session duration, but they're not happy. So then there's something wrong, missing in my documentation. Either the hierarchy is too much, either I'm giving too much information. There's time to change the strategy, think more of adding more use cases or something like that. So these are basically numbers. And then the last part that you see is the demographic information. So that is really important if you have a global team where you have your customers all around the world who are using your documentation and you really want to understand which part of the, you know, which country is doing well. Like, you know, if I get a lot of low numbers from, say, the North American continent, then, you know, as a manager or as a, you know, senior person, I would go and talk to my product team that, is this region really important? Should we, you know, do something because I'm not getting good documentation matrix for this particular region. So that discussion will, you know, so you need numbers, something which will get you started on that discussion with your team to understand how important that geography is so that, you know, we can do something to improvise our documentation. So Google Analytics is basically a simple tool. First of all, it's a freeware, it's an open source tool. You can purchase it if you want to use advanced features. And it's a simple JavaScript code which needs to be embedded inside the web page that you want to track. So it's very simple to get started with it. If your product or your organization is already using it, then nothing like it, because they all will help you to, you know, do the similar thing for your portal. Right, okay. Now let's come to the usability testing part. Okay, so we looked at the common methods like surveys, we looked at Google Analytics. You can also do something like as interviews. You know, you can just go and talk to someone. You know, many a times your deployment teams, especially if your products are not directly installed and configured by your users, you have somebody at the you know, site who's an engineer, just talk to them, you know. They will first of all try to ignore, I mean, you know, most of the time documentation teams are not really, you know, they're not answered well. They will not really engage, but you begin the conversation by asking that, are you facing any problem? Like, is this helpful? Or, you know, are you, should we add something more? Get that conversation going and that interview. So that is like, you know, in the user research terms is termed as user interviews, but that is like a simple conversation which will get you started in digging deeper, that is it helping my deployment engineer, my own internal organization member? If he's having this experience, then the customer is not going to be kind to me. They are going to be really rude to, you know, they are just going to throw the documentation out. So that's another common technique which I haven't covered in a slide, but that's one of the common techniques which was mentioned in that table. And now we're coming to the usability testing part. So usability, as we all know, we've been talking and hearing a lot about usability. So what is usability? So usability basically measures the learnability, Learnability is like, how easily I can learn. As a new user to any product or any documentation site, how easy it is for me to get started, how intuitive is your UI. Efficiency is for your advanced users, that how efficiently they can perform a task by listening to, or listening to your video or looking at your online topic. Memorability is like something like how we use Zomato and Swiggy, they store our address the next time we go. So if we have, if we can have that in the interface, if the search terms can be saved, just like how Google, when you start typing, they throw up the search terms. So something like that if we can do, wherein the documentation site or the search bar is throwing up terms for easy search. And recovery from errors. So that's quite obvious, is that suppose you followed a topic but you didn't accomplish that, but if you come back and try to locate, you find the right right topic of information. And lastly, satisfaction. And this is another like a short summary of how difficult to use documentation differs from easy to use documentation. So easy to use documentation has all the required qualities. It has high UX, good metrics, everyone's happy, your life is easy, you are happy with your job, everything is good. But that's not most of the time the case, it's somewhere in between. So, but it should definitely not be the right side column, that is, it is very difficult to use your documentation, you have drop off rates, so that's not good. And in the usability testing technique, so why we talked about usability is because you must understand what do you mean, you understand usability, so you understand what you test in usability. So usability testing is basically testing all those parameters of learnability, efficiency, memorability. So you've done your surveys, you've been tracking metrics for a while, you've done your surveys, you've done your user interviews, Google Analytics has given you numbers, you want to dig deep. You've identified one particular area, you want to dig deep, that my landing page of the site has a lot of dropouts. There is something wrong in that design. You don't know because you don't want to go by anybody's opinion or suggestions, you want to be driven by data. So this is a technique, usability techniques, that's why I'm saying these are advanced techniques. When you have some numbers and some numbers are not good and you want to dig deep, so these are the techniques which will help you dig deep and understand where you want to focus. So one such technique is heat map testing. So heat map testing is basically visual analytics. It will show you those green areas that you see on the screen is where the maximum the users have clicked. So that's on the Amazon website. These are this technique is very useful in the product space, when especially in e-commerce, to understand whether where your users concentrating and where they should focus on. Another technique is A/B testing. A/B testing is like I've understood that my call to action in your knowledge base, call to action is like your search button where you're searching for your product list or your any category. That particular area is some heat map testing shows me that people don't look at that. People look at the other side. So now what do? I go back and sit with my tooling team, redesign the main page, and then test. So A/B testing helps you do that. You roll out the first version as is to 40%, and you roll to 50% visitors, and the revised version you roll out to another 50%, and you check. And you call the first version as control, and the second version as a variation, and you keep tracking over a period of time that which version is doing best, whether this particular change of the interface helped me. And multivariate test is another variation of A/B testing, wherein in A/B testing you can do only one change and release a variant, but in multivariate testing you can do multiple changes. So if Obama's election campaign, before they actually released that website, they had a big combination of images and buttons changing. They had like 16 variations. So they had 3-4, the image was changing in each variation. The button name, the label of the button was changing, and a couple of other, UI elements. So 3-4 UI elements, you want to release like 5 versions. So you have 5 elements and 5 versions. So 5, so whatever number of elements you have, you multiply that, and that amount of variants you can keep releasing to your, to your end users. I understand that as documentation people, we don't have so much bandwidth to keep releasing so many variations. It requires time, investment of time. But just to, just wanted to introduce it, like if you A/B testing is only one, like, you will get an opportunity to test one particular element, there is another technique wherein you can test more than one element variation. All right, so this is one of the last techniques. So segmentation and funnel analysis, these techniques are very rampant in the B2C space used by product teams, wherein when you are new to the market, you want to focus on one particular group. So how do you decide that group? You decide that group based on location, maybe demographics, and their behavior. So you know that, before you actually, like in the product space, what do? Is they do a lot of research to understand that, okay, this particular area, I can launch this particular food menu. Like, even like Swiggy, Zomato, they've done that kind of a research before when they launched. So segmentation helps you decide, where to launch first. So in case of documentation, as I mentioned earlier, if you have an international audience, and your teams told you that I have maximum customers in North America, this product gives me maximum business from this particular region, and I want my documentation catered to the North American language, and I want this particular team to adopt the documentation. So this kind of information, this is a technique, I mean, especially if you have your numbers going down in a particular region, segmentation will help you understand that how many users do we have in that region, how important is it to my product success, and then I should focus, that I should ensure, that should be my first priority, that I will try to improve the matrix for documentation for that particular region. And funnel analysis. So the name funnel is basically a user workflow. So somebody's come to like a knowledge base site, they've searched for a product, gone inside, then they suddenly exit, come out, they look for another product, they go inside, they come out. So this is one user workflow. I have one user who's very dedicated, who knows what to do. He goes, searches the product name, gets inside, gets to the configuration section, checks configuration topics, goes to the usage part, tries to understand what kind of particular module is doing, and sticks there and exits. So that's like a workflow. So funnel is basically a workflow which every user is following. And why do you do funnel analysis? To understand the first pattern which I just mentioned. To understand that is the user just surfing inside your knowledge portal, because that's not your intention, right? You want to know that which pages and which topics are being read, are being adopted, those tutorials or those videos that you've embedded inside, are they being used? So this is where your funnel analysis comes and tells you that, yes, this is where it should focus on. It's like, I mean, this is being achieved. So if I look at Google Analytics, you can do the funnel analysis study in Google Analytics too. So if you go down, there is a user flow section. There you can actually see that from which browser, which traffic is coming, and what are all the users, which pages they are accessing. So especially, I'm again reiterating that you would not begin with segmentation. You will not begin with funnel analysis. You will begin with the common techniques. You will get some numbers in place. You will study those numbers, and then you will understand that where your numbers are low, and then you will adopt these techniques to focus on this particular area and how to improvise. How do I, maybe change the information architecture, add more use cases, add more examples, whatever your product and domain demands. So, and these are the references. These are like, very like selected, to get you started on each of them, in case, you are not aware with usability testing, how do you set up your Google Analytics, a beginner's guide. So I hope they prove useful. Yeah, so this is all about it. I'm in the interest of time, I have, covered, try to cover everything. But in case you all need any information, any discussion, please walk up and be happy to discuss. So, yeah, so any questions? Yes, please, yes.
Thank you, Sangeeta. I have a question, and I want to also add something to what you
Surely,
mentioned.
yeah.
So So you've laid a very good foundation on how technical writers can make use of analytics, and so that was really good. Yeah, the question is, most part of it you were trying to go parallel with the product management space and try to make it parallel for the technical documentation field. So do you do something specific only for technical documentation, not in concern with product management at your organization is the question. Do you have specific metrics for documentation, and what are the action items that you take out of it?
So as I just mentioned, even though we, this particular session is more of an, how to use those frameworks for documentation, but the matrix are very specific to documentation. So that's the hard work that you have to do. You have to sit with your documentation team and understand how to fit matrix in that particular framework. So that's where you begin. And surveys, everything is going to be very specific to your documentation. If the method, it's only the method that we are inspiring from them, but everything needs to be boiled down and focused to documentation. So effort on your team's end is definitely going to be required.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I really wouldn't like to do this, but I would encourage you to join the next track
Sure,
where
sure,
at SAP we have done some extensive analytics implementation purely for documentation.
Okay.
So I'm trying to talk about how within the bandwidth of a technical writer, how not just do these numbers, but also add value to the overall product is what we tried it over at SAP using these numbers. So I encourage you and all the audience to join the track one.
Surely, surely,
And I
yeah,
think we can sync up and have a lot of conversation. Thanks.
Absolutely, yes. Surely, yes.
Before we part for a 10 minutes break, I would like to thank and congratulate Sangeeta. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Megha. Yeah.